Good morning, everyone. I apologize for the delay in getting started, a little bit of technical difficulty, but I would like to welcome all of you to our presentation today. This is the interaction of processes and its importance to a successful audit. My name is Joseph Krolikowski. I am the QMS Program Manager for PJR. A couple of notes for our attendees. All of you are on mute. But we absolutely want to address your questions if you have them. So please utilize the question portion of the dashboard. We will address questions at the end of the presentation. One of the more common questions that we get is whether or not this presentation will be made available after we're finished. We do make our webinars available in two ways. First of all, if you'd like to get a copy of the slides, those will be available for download from the PJR website. And if you'd like to rewatch this webinar, we do post all of our webinars to our YouTube page, and you'll find the link for that on the pgr.com website as well. Now, our topics for today, we're going to be kind of unpacking this topic from the background, kind of give you a sense of why this is so important. We're going to align, we're going to align the requirements that are found in ISO 9001, the current 2015 revision. We're going to talk about both what is and what is not a process and try to give you a sense of how this is viewed in the eyes of the industry. We'll give you some strategies for meeting the requirement that we have, potentially with minimal changes to your existing documentation. And we're also going to look at the impact of outsourced processes. So we've got a lot to cover today. Now, 10 years ago, we were given a mandate from the accreditation bodies, folks like ANAB, UCAS, etc. And we were told that we needed to be very strict on client interaction of process documents, or IOPs. And this was rooted primarily in a requirement from ISO 17021. Now, you can think of ISO 17021 as sort of the ISO 9001 for certification bodies like PJR. And the requirement that was cited reads as follows. An audit program for the full certification cycle shall be developed to identify the audit activities to demonstrate that the client's management system fulfills the requirements for certification. Now, the expected interpretation of that is that when an audit is performed, our auditors have to document their audits in such a way that they reflect the client's management system. That's the key here. So this means that we have to adhere to your interaction of processes and only your interaction of processes. Now, if the documents that you present don't do an effective job of identifying what your processes are, the auditor's job is exceedingly difficult. So we've trained our auditors that if they encounter an IOP that does not identify processes in an appropriate manner, they need to write it up. They need to cite it as a nonconformance. Now, in terms of the clauses from ISO 9001 where this is rooted, there's three primary clauses at play here. Firstly, in section 4.4.1, it states that you shall determine the processes needed for the quality management system. And then you shall determine the sequence and interaction of those processes. Now, in 4.4.2, it states that you shall maintain documented information to support the operation of your processes. So that's kind of the clause that is cited and is in play, if you will, in terms of the interaction of processes needing to be something that is on the record, so to speak. So let's consider now what is a process. And there's actually an official definition for this. It comes from the ISO 9000 document. ISO 9000 is called Fundamentals and Vocabulary. And process is defined as a set of interrelated or interacting activities that use inputs to deliver an intended result. Now, the real key piece here is this business of interrelated or interacting activities. You have to understand that a process in most circumstances is not a single step. It's actually a series of activities focused on a shared goal. Now, in terms of common process designations, I've listed some items here that we see time and time again. A lot of organizations have a process that they call purchasing. A lot of organizations have a process that they call production. I've listed some others here. Now, the intent is that your IOP needs to reflect what you understand your processes to be. So if you have a very straightforward quality management system and it's made up of 4 processes, let's say those are sales, purchasing, production, and support, that's fine. That's completely acceptable. It just has to be consistent with what our auditors will see when they are performing their audits. Now, in terms of what is not a process and where IOP documents are going to be rejected in the context of an audit, most of these are going to be items that present steps within a single process. So, for example, if we've got steps like create a work order, complete a work order, package a product, ship a product, are those individual processes or are those pieces of the process? That's a key discussion that you need to have internally. What are the actual processes? Another issue that comes up, an IOP that presents sections from the applicable standard as your processes. I mean, think about it. Do you really have a process called resource management? That's ISO speak. That's not a process name. If you have an IOP with these types of concerns, it's potentially going to result in a nonconformance during the audit. Now, there are a number of ways that your documentation, even if you have a very complex IOP, there's a number of ways that you can work with what you already have to have it more properly reflect what your processes are. Now, at this point, this is obviously a rather mature requirement, so hopefully most of you on this call today already have something that is acceptable, or you're working on something that's going to be acceptable. But let's go through our model here and kind of map out how this works. So what we're going to do is we're going to review a sample of an IOP, and we're going to apply 2 improvements to it. Now, this example was actually created for this presentation when this presentation was first developed. Unsurprisingly, we've had a few clients, shall we say, borrow something very similar to this for their IOP, and obviously that's not completely surprising. Okay, so here is our model IOP, and I want to point out that there are some items on here that are potentially full processes unto themselves, like perhaps shipping, and there's a whole lot of stuff on here that is potentially pieces of a process. Like, for example, second from the left up top, order entered in the mainframe system. Again, is that really a full process unto itself, or is that a piece of a process? So in total, we've got 12 steps here and 2 decision diamonds. So how many processes are there? represented by all of this activity? Well, let's see if we can figure that out. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put a placeholder for support activities. Now, ISO 9000 and 9001 don't actually draw any particular distinction between process classifications. Now, this does come up fairly often, and I've got some examples for you later where you'll be able to see that at work. But when we talk about support processes, we're referring to things like management review or training or corrective action, calibration even potentially, activities that support the quality management system at large. And it is a part of what you're doing, obviously. And as the interaction of processes needs to account for all of the processes, let's make sure that our test model here has that included. Okay, so we've gone ahead now and we've added the support processes, as you can see, in the lower right corner. And you'll note that it is not connected to any individual process, but rather it is demonstrated as being support for the entire rest of this organization's activities, sort of supporting everything in sort of equal fashion. And the other thing that we're going to do here is we're going to create an IOP key. And this was a very popular strategy for organizations who were told suddenly that their IOP was no longer acceptable. Now, what this does, obviously, it enables the IOP to stay as is, but it helps us identify what the processes are. So let's see what that looks like. Okay. So by virtue of adding this key, we now understand that we have 6 processes. The sales order entry in orange, purchasing in green, production in yellow, shipping, as I mentioned, a standalone process in purple, something called quality in red, and support in blue. So now we've got something. We've allowed this IOP to stay as it was before, but now we know what the processes are, and we have inclusion of the support processes. This is an IOP that will be ready for audit assessment. Now, there's a lot of ways to do this, and over the years, we've had some clients that have had some unique perspectives on how to render what their processes are. So what we want to do now is share some additional examples with you. Now, in all cases, permission was granted. These are actual client IOPs that we're going to be looking at. Permission was granted in all cases for us to make this part of our presentation. So our first example here, kind of a straightforward single flow, if you will, kind of from top to bottom. And again, you'll note the support processes are kind of off in the side here, with the idea being that it supports the flow in total. Nothing terribly unique here, but again, it's important to identify that these are definitely full processes. This one is rather unique. One of the things that I like to point out with this IOP is the unique nature of some of the process names. You'll note right in the center, we've got a process named overhaul. That is a unique process name. Not a lot of companies have that. There's a process here called inventory management. Again, a somewhat unique process. You'll also note that this IOP kind of draws numerous linkages. The quote process, for example, seemingly only interacts with 2 other processes besides receiving what they call management-related support, and so forth. So, I mean, there's a lot of interesting things going on with this particular IOP. Here's another unique model. I believe this method is typically referred to as swim lane. In this model, we actually have 4 processes: sales, purchasing, production, support. And what's unique here is that sales and purchasing, in a sense, they kind of work independently of each other at the beginning. One is triggered by a receipt of orders from customers, the other by a review of available inventory. Now, they kind of meet up in the middle, so to speak, by the issuance of the work order, and then they both flow into production. And production, as you can see, is identified as being made up of 4 distinct steps. Again, support processes in the bottom there, that's made up of a number of different things. And again, the larger idea is that these items provide support to the larger flow. So this is another way of understanding what your processes are and how they interact with each other. Here's another example. Again, I'd like to point out the unique nature of some of these process names: service exchange, distribution, what have you. What this company has done, they've used yellow highlighting to indicate what their core processes are. And in this case, there happen to be 5 of them. They've indicated that if it's not highlighted, it is support. So in this model, we have 6 processes. We have the 5 core activities, and then support kind of making up everything else. So again, kind of a unique way of demonstrating what the processes are. I'd like to shift gears now and talk a little bit about outsourced processes. This is yet another layer of requirements. Now, many organizations outsource a few or even several of their processes to external providers. Now, remember, an external provider is defined in ISO as a provider that is not part of the organization. So this is a rather inclusive term. It's meant to include subcontractors and partner companies, parent companies, suppliers, etc. Now, we've got a whole separate webinar that addresses outsourcing. If you look for our presentation, non-applicable clauses, permissible exclusions, exemptions, there's a kind of a deeper dive into the idea of outsourcing. Now, there are several things that we can point to and say this is an example of an outsourced process. And I've listed many of them here with clause numbers. So calibration being probably the most obvious. Most companies have some form of outsourcing to a calibration provider. But we see training a lot as well, or design activities. Even manufacturing can be outsourced. So why are we talking about this in the context of the IOP document? Well, let's remember what some of the key requirements are from ISO 9001. 441, as we said earlier, it requires an organization to determine what the processes are. So we covered that. In 841, it requires you to maintain control over any outsourced processes. Then in 442, again, that you have documented information supporting the operation of the process. So we've had some recent feedback from the accreditation bodies that has indicated that your IOP or something supporting the IOP has to identify what your outsourced processes are in an effective way. If it's not on the IOP itself, it needs to be discussed somewhere within your quality management system documentation. Now, you might use a special font to call it out. You may choose to give the outsourced processes their own place on the IOP. However you choose to do this is entirely up to you. We want to ensure that we are providing our clients with a value-added audit while still meeting all applicable requirements. We do hope that the points of our presentation are going to help you develop an even better understanding of what your processes are. I'd like to invite you to tune in for one of our other webinars. We have a very popular webinar on ISO 9001:2015, knowing what to expect to ensure a stress-free audit. This is a deep dive into some of the more common issues that come up on ISO 9001 audits and what is expected. As I mentioned, we have our presentation on non-applicable clauses, and we've got webinars on a wide variety of other topics, Stage 1 audits, AS 9100, and many other topics of interest. If you'd like to be kept informed of the latest news automatically, the very best way for you to do that is to visit our website at www.pgr.com. Go to the bottom of the page and enter your email address. You will be opted in for automatic updates on upcoming webinars, changes to the standards, and other points of information. I do thank you for your time and your patience with us getting our presentation started. If you have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question portion of the dashboard. Okay, it would appear we have no questions today, so I'll wish everyone well. Thank you so much.